Joe just said they offered him the job.
Huh?
Joe was studying my friend.
Oh, they did?
Yeah.
Take it.
Now we're gonna get the whole Gonzaga crew over here. Me, Joe, and Sylvia, we all graduated together.
That's fine.
28, 29, 30. All the young guns are here.
Yeah, scary thought.
They're coming for your job.
No way. I already told my job I'm gonna stay here as long as Mr. Meager is gonna stay here.
Get longer than y'all think, for one. All right.
Do you need a laser pointer?
I got one.
I know, I copied you and I got one too. I'm Brad's copycat.
Amber's case, she's the last person to use this thing. Okay, we don't need this.
I'm just gonna wrap it up and put it down there then. Hey guys. Hello.
So. He's on it, right? Ledger. I was here, I was here, I was here, I was here, I was here. You can point to where stuff was. I just say, just don't flash anybody anyway with it. But that's basically it. I got 3 pictures. I'll just zoom them in. I was going to ask you about this. I already said, pushed up against this. You right? So I'm trying to keep it custom. Just like
Houses like that falls into the little curves.
yeah. This enhanced for sure for what? Cool.
Did she turn?
What's that?
She's on it.
Yeah, she's unloading right now.
No, you're all right. Get out of it, Daddy. Yes. This is a great laser pointer, man. I can bounce this thing off the moon. It's real. We have these wimpy ones, you know, little ones that screw, you know, that's not cool. They wouldn't get fuzzy. All right, that's it.
I'm just getting this case right now.
It's just a 360.
What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your office is the judges?
Yeah.
No, you haven't put anything in? No. over the past year or 2 years? Have I put in?
I don't think you're hearing anything in this first.
You know, you're off.
So-
Excuse me, are you the attorney for the defendant?
Yes, this is Lisa.
Lisa, that's, oh, I'm sorry.
Just a moment.
Please rise.
You seated? Good afternoon. This is State versus Troy Restvedt, case number 18-1643. I'm Brad Meager for the state. Mr. Restvedt is here, out of custody, represented by Lisa Martinez. I was scheduled for a 3-6 hearing and some other motions. State's ready.
That is correct, Your Honor. Lisa Martinez, attorney of record, here with Troy Restvedt out of custody.
All right. Okay, a couple of things here. So first, since it's a 3-6 and there's going to be testimony, I'm going to exclude witnesses from the courtroom until after they've testified. So any witnesses, anybody who's going to be a witness in this case needs to wait outside in the hall. All right, Mr. Restvedt, before we get started with this hearing, you need to understand you do have some rights. Specifically, you do have the right to remain silent. You also have a right to testify at this hearing. If you do testify at this hearing, you need to understand that anything you say here could be used against you at a trial should this matter proceed to trial. You understand that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, any preference, Mr. Meeker, as to the order of these?
States would prefer to put the officers on and deal with the entry into the property first. I've got 2 officers here.
Any
No
objection to that?
objections, Your Honor.
All right, I think that makes sense. All right, Mr. Meeker.
Thank you. So, I would first call Officer Huerta. Just go ahead and sit up there.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Have a seat.
Please state your full name and spell your last name.
Name's Officer Andrew Mufaso Huerta. Last is Huerta, the fourth.
All right, Officer, so we're transcribing everything today, so I need to speak slowly and clearly, okay?
Yes, sir.
Officer Huerta, what do you do for a living?
I'm a police officer for the city of Centralia.
How long have you been employed there?
I've been employed as a police officer since June of 2017.
And what did you do before that?
I was a community service officer for the Centralia Police Department as well.
How long had you done that?
I was a community service officer for starting June of 2016.
Describe for me a little bit about your training.
My training consists of 720 hours at the State Criminal Justice Training Center. There, I was taught multiple investigation techniques to include narcotics and patrol stops and various other investigation techniques.
Now, were you on duty as a police officer on August 17th, 2018?
Yes, sir.
And were you in uniform and driving a parked patrol car?
Yes, sir.
At some point, were you dispatched out to 500 East Plum Street in Centralia?
I was, yes.
Why?
Because there was a report of a possible burn in the 500 block of East Plum Street, and the fire department indicated that they've told the subject to put the fire out previously, and during that contact he was, I believe it states in my report, aggressive in nature, aggressive and yeah.
Okay. And so, why were you going out there?
I previously had contact with Mr. Restvedt. During that contact, there was a lady with mental health issues in the woods, and she was left up there for about 4 days. She was given food. I can't recall if she was given water, but during that contact, Mr. Restvedt, he wasn't the most polite during that contact. So I was not the initial officer dispatched to the call, so I was covering Officer Dorf, knowing my previous history with Mr. Restvedt.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what? I didn't understand you.
I was the backup officer to Officer Dorf because of my previous history with Mr. Restvedt.
Did you get bulletins from the county regarding burn bans in your duties as a law enforcement officer?
Yes, sir, through Spillman Message Center, and also I stay up to date on the Chronicle.
Was there a burn ban in effect on August 17th, 2018?
Yes, sir.
Was that a total burn ban?
Yes, sir.
Was that declared by the county?
Yes, sir.
Did you know that when you were dispatched out to 500 East Plum Street?
I did, sir.
So, describe the driveway up to this particular street.
The driveway, if I can recall correctly, it's a gravel driveway. It's kind of a harder place to find. It's kind of back off the 400 block of East Plum and tucked away behind a house.
I'm going to show you what has been marked as plaintiff's identification 1. Can you describe what that picture depicts?
That appears to be Mr. Restvedt's house and his shed, as well as the backdrop of Seminary Hill.
Is that how it looked on August 17th, 2018?
Yes, sir.
What's the vantage point of that picture when it was taken?
The vantage point, I would say from the north side of the alleyway.
Move to admit identification 1.
Objection.
Identification 1 is admitted as Exhibit 1.
May I publish?
Yes.
All right, officer, we've got exhibit number 1 up here on the screen so we all can see it. I've got a laser pointer here for you. Let's first start with the vantage point. Where's the hood of your car?
The hood of my car is actually in the 400 block of East Plum.
Okay. Is this taken from a hood of somebody else's car?
I believe so. I don't know which officer took it.
Okay. And then, would you describe for the court where you saw the fire? Well, let's back up. When you drove up, were there any indications that you saw that there was a fire?
There was smoke in there.
You could smell it?
I could smell it.
Did it appear to be wood burning smoke?
Yes, sir.
You know what wood burning smoke smells like?
Yes, sir.
Did you see any smoke?
I saw, initially I didn't, but when I was made aware by Officer Dorf, I did see smoke.
And did you see smoke coming from any area depicted on this Exhibit 1?
Yes, I saw smoke coming from this area.
Back behind what appears to be a white rust-colored shed. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, there's a bunch of foliage back beyond that. Do you know what that's for? Let me back up. Do you know what property Mr. Restvedt's property butts up against?
Yes, sir. Seminary Hill.
And are the trees that are depicted in this picture on the Seminary Hill property or close to it?
Yes, sir. I would say no more than 15 to 20 feet.
All right. So when you got there, you smelled smoke. You know there's a burn ban on. You know there had been the fire department had been out there earlier that day, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then the fire department then had called dispatch and they called you, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So you know all this. When you drive up, what do you do next?
I initially investigate where the smoke is coming from. Like I said, I smelled it. I was made aware by Officer Dorf that he actually seen the fire coming from that area. I saw the smoke as well. Me and Officer Dorf proceeded towards, we heard two male voices, and we proceeded to this area right here, where we made contact with Mr. Restvedt and Mr. Benz.
Is Mr. Restvedt in the courtroom today?
Yes, sir.
Can you point to him and describe what he's wearing?
He's right there, sitting in the defendant chair. He's got gray slacks, a blue button-up, and a black suit.
Okay. So the record should reflect that witnesses identified the defendant. All right, so you contacted Mr. Restvedt, and please point to the picture and show the judge exactly where you made first contact with the defendant.
Myself and Officer Dorf were right about there.
Say that again?
Myself and Officer Dorf were right about there.
All right, what happened next?
I asked Mr. Restvedt to put the fire out. He began to tell me he was a red card firefighter and that he had a 5-gallon bucket of water next to the fire pit, so it was okay to have that fire at that time.
All right. Now, was this during daylight hours?
Yes, sir.
Did you have to open a gate or a fence to get inside the yard where you pointed to?
Negative.
Was the patrol car parked on a driveway or a right-of-way of some type?
The city street.
Was there any barrier between where your vehicle was parked and the point of contact with the defendant?
Could we define barrier?
A gate, a fence?
No.
And what was your purpose in going onto the property to contact the defendant?
I wanted the defendant to put the fire out due to the high risk of fire, due to the high risk of fire season. I wanted to prevent a fire in the area.
All right, so when you contacted the defendant, what happened next?
Mr. Restvedt got very upset. Like I said, he claimed he was a red card firefighter. It was okay to have the fire because he was a bucket of water and he knew what he was doing. Mr. Restvedt, after going back and forth with him, he finally put the bucket of water on the fire. At that time, the fire was still smoldering and smoking. I asked him if he could please put one more bucket of water on the fire, and he continued to argue with me again about doing so. After going back and forth, he would put a second bucket of water on there on the fire. At that time, I asked for his name, and he
Let me stop you right there. Why did you ask him for his name?
because I needed it for his report, or I needed it for my report, and when I was going to criminally cite him for if I was to criminally cite him for the reckless burning, then I know who I would have had contact with.
What happened when you asked him for his name?
Mr. Restvedt got very upset. He told me to,
We're all adults here, go ahead.
he said, "Fuck you," and get the fuck off my property. And at that time, I found he was going to be uncooperative with the rest of my investigation.
All right. Now, by him failing to give you his name, did that hinder you at all in your investigation?
It did.
All right, so what did you decide to do next?
I decided to place Mr. Restvedt in custody for the illegal burn.
Was that your intent when you first approached the property?
No,
What was your intent when you first approached the property?
to have Mr. Restvedt comply with the fire department like they asked previously.
All right, so we're at the point, he's not giving you his name, what do you do next?
I start approaching Mr. Restvedt to take him to custody. I tell him he's under arrest.
What did he do when you told him he was under arrest?
He began to argue. He told me I can't make a statement on what he exactly said as I was going to take him to custody, but he began to back away from me. I went in for a push-pull entry and to turn around so I could place him in handcuffs. And at that point, I see in my peripheral vision Mr. Benz approach me as well, and that's when Officer Dorf stepped up, and he got in an altercation with Mr. Benz as I was continuing to try to take Mr. Restvedt into custody.
Well, when you saw at your periphery that Mr. Benz was coming towards you, what did you think?
I believed that Mr. Benz was going to grab me from behind.
Now, was Mr. Restvedt compliant with the arrest?
No, sir.
How so?
When I was going through the push-pull entry, he was batting my hands away and turning away from me, and like he was, he wasn't complying with the arrest.
Now, when you say batting your hands away, explain to the court what you mean by that.
So with a push-pull entry, you're coming here or you're coming here. With that, he was coming here and batting my hands away.
What happened next?
Officer Dorf was in the altercation with Mr. Benz. I continued to try to take Mr. Restvedt into custody. He continued to back up. There was a large pile of debris on the ground, possibly from remodeling. I would say the debris is wood and other miscellaneous items. Mr. Restvedt fell into the shed, and then fell into a small confined space. And at that point, during this time, I was giving Mr. Restvedt commands to stop, to stop and quit resisting. And after Mr. Restvedt fell down, I told him I continued to tell him he was under arrest and stop, and he continued to get up, and he eventually stood up to his feet, and at that point I applied the LVR hold on Mr. Restvedt.
Did you get control of him?
I didn't have control of him until the ground.
Well, did you eventually get control of him?
Yes, sir.
Did you put handcuffs on him?
Yes, sir.
Now, when he was swatting your hands away, was that a welcome contact that you had with him?
No, sir.
Was he swatting your hands away with the express purpose of resisting your arrest?
I believe so. That's how I perceived it.
Other questions?
Ross?
the call came about because of the fire department telling you, can you explain that again?
Yes, ma'am. The fire department contacted our dispatch, that we share a dispatch center. They generated a law number, which tells us that we need to respond to a call and make some type of lawful action to it. In that call, it advised the fire department had asked Mr. Restvedt to put previously put a fire out, and that during that fire he was had an aggressive manner, and I believe it said that the fire was started again.
Okay, did you ever have direct communication with the person who made the complaint, the person from the fire department that made the complaint to dispatch?
I did not.
Did you ever verify any further beyond what you were told from dispatch, the actual facts of that call?
Yes, when I made contact with Mr. Restvedt, and he said that the fire department was there.
Okay. Anything toward the aggressive nature of Mr. Restvedt? Did you ever confirm any of that prior?
Negative. Like I previously said, I didn't have the best contact with Mr. Restvedt the first time.
And we'll get into that in just a moment. So you say that you went to the house to basically enforce what the fire department obviously was not able to enforce prior. So would you say, is there a certain level that you all give to calls as far as what is high in priority, what is low in priority?
I would say yes.
And so where would you rate this type of call?
At that time, I would say, due to the nature of the time.
Is it not rated?
It is.
So what is the actual rating of this type?
I would have to see what the dispatch put on our catalog.
Okay. Did you show up to this call lights and sirens?
Negative. I was
Was fire sent out with you?
negative.
Okay. So were you prepared to battle a fire if there was indeed a fire?
Negative. I was prepared to
So
call
who in the county is prepared to battle fires?
the fire department.
Okay. Was it your understanding that the fire department had no interest in coming back out to this house?
Not exactly, no.
I'm not sure if that was an answer that, not exactly no to what, that was a double question there. So I'd like to
Sure.
rephrase your question, so I'm sure which one was being answered. Either that wasn't his understanding, or the fire department had no interest. I'm not sure what.
Let me ask you this. Were there any additional reports of a fire in the area?
Negative.
Okay. Were there any reports from any citizens in the community that were concerned about the fire?
Negative.
Okay, so when the fire department contacted dispatch, they had already come out. Dispatch then contacted you. So it's my understanding that dispatch contacted you to go enforce what they were not able to enforce. Is that correct?
Unfortunately, I can't speak for the fire department.
Okay, would you be seen as a follow-up to that initial call?
I would say a new call was generated, so this would be a whole new contact.
Okay. Was there any reason for you to believe that there was an emergency that was going on?
Negative.
Okay. And do you know how much time passed between the initial complaint and to when you got out to the house?
Negative.
Could you give an estimate?
The call came out pretty close to when I got on the shift. I can't recall if that was $1,800 or $1,900.
1900 being 7 o'clock
Mhm.
versus 1800 being 6 o'clock?
Yes, ma'am.
So somewhere in between 6 or 7, this call came and you were just transitioning onto your shift?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So when you arrived, did you alert dispatch of your arrival?
Yes, ma'am.
And so what do you remember what you told dispatch when you arrived?
Negative.
Okay, is there a common code that you call out when you arrive to a location?
Yes, ma'am.
And what is that code?
My batch number is 318, so I would generally say 318 radio arriving. Or due to Officer Dorf being there, 318, 327 arriving.
I'm sorry.
Due to Officer Dorf
What was the
being
number, 318 and?
318 is my number, and Officer Dorf's number is 327.
Okay, and then when you arrive to a call and you see that there is no emergency or things are under control, is there a code that you use then?
Code 4.
Code 4. Do you recall responding to this call with a code 4 initially?
I do.
Officer Huerta, you wrote a report regarding this incident?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you viewed your report since the incident?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you happen to notice that at the top of your report, I'm assuming this is your report, it's signed by you, but the name of the officer at the top of the
I'm
report
gonna object.
is
If
Dorf?
he's gonna be questioning this report, you gotta be able to look at it.
I don't have any problem introducing him.
Yeah, mark it.
Just give it to the clerk to mark.
May I approach your honor?
Yes.
Officer Huerta, if you could just review the start of your report there.
For the record, what is the number?
3.
Identification 3.
Go.
So at the top of your report, it reads Dorf. Can you explain that to me?
I've never seen that, ma'am.
Do you know how something like that would happen?
The only thing I could say is he was maybe initially the primary officer when the call was dispatched. I have never seen this before.
Okay, so each incident report that follows subsequent to that by various officers, their names are at the top as well as their names are signed. So are these reports generated digitally? Are you filling it out on a computer?
Yes, ma'am. Filling out a Word document and transposing it over to our record system.
So that record system, is there maybe a drop-down box where you select different officers and you can select your own name to go with your report?
Negative.
Okay. Could you maybe give us a little bit more information on how you go about entering your name so it's attached to your Word document?
I write my name at the bottom under the penalty of perjury and submit my report through our spelling system. And from there, it has a responsible officer. So that's why I'm not sure in this case if he was listed as the primary and that's what's going on here. I can't tell you.
Okay. So, do you remember who arrived in Mr. Restvedt's backyard first?
I believe Officer Dorf and I arrived at the same time.
Okay.
We were together.
And who else was with you?
Deputy Lewis County Prosecuting Attorney Alicia Chandra.
Okay. Do you recall Ms. Chandra getting to the backyard before you and Officer Dorf?
Negative. No. Me and Officer Dorf arrived first.
Okay. Do you recall which side of the house that you approached on?
The southeast side. Or southwest side, sorry.
So that side's not shown in the picture, is that correct?
Correct.
And on the side that you arrived, do you recall passing a front door?
Yes.
Okay. And so why didn't you knock on the front door?
Because I could smell smoke in there.
Okay. So then you walked around the side of the house, the side where all of the cars are parked. It's not shown in this photo, but I believe there's more photos up there. Let me just check if we already have an exhibit. Borrow that for a moment. So you arrived on the southwest side. That's the side where the gravel road is?
Yes.
Okay. So you approach the gravel road, you bypass the front door, go around the south side of the house. Can you explain what was in that area?
Looked like there was some construction materials, like I previously stated, wood, miscellaneous items, and then there was two tarps hanging.
Okay. And so if you back away from the south side, were there vehicles lined up along that side?
If I recall, I didn't notice at first, but after I left, I saw vehicles there, yes.
Okay. Okay. So if you were standing at the gravel road, would you be able to see into the backyard?
From the southwest side, no.
Okay. And then from this side, you had already said that this isn't your car, which, you know, this picture was taken at a later time. Are you able to see the backyard where you all were, where the incident occurred?
You can partially see it.
Okay. Can you see the chairs from that view that were back there?
Negative.
Okay. Can you see the fire pit from that view?
If you walked northbound, there's a possibility.
Okay, there's a possibility. Do you recall that there was a tarp on that side?
I do not recall that it was.
Okay. So when you went to the backyard, who did you have contact with first?
Mr. Restvedt.
Okay. Did you ask whose home that was?
Negative, I knew from a previous contact.
Did you ask for any identification upon making contact?
Not at that time.
Did you happen to see no trespassing signs in the area?
I saw one after I left.
When you made contact with Mr. Restvedt and you all had a conversation, do you recall telling Mr. Restvedt that he had an opportunity to either put the fire out or be arrested?
I did.
Did Mr. Restvedt put the fire out?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall Mr. Restvedt going to a nearby water spigot to refill a bucket of water?
After an argument?
Do you
Yes.
recall that? Okay. Do you remember where the water spigot was?
If I can recall, the southwest side of the building.
Okay. Did you go with him so he could refill the bucket of water?
Negative.
Okay. So he came back around the side of the house to the backyard with a bucket of water, and he poured a second bucket of water, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said in your testimony, and it's also in your report, that Mr. Restvedt told you to get the fuck off of his property after that was all said and done.
Yes, ma'am.
Did that irritate you?
Negative.
What was your reaction to it?
If I can recall, I looked at Officer Dorf, and my decision was made.
So what was your reaction?
That Mr. Restvedt was compliant with the rest of the investigation, and he would be taken into custody.
So how long did it take between the time that Mr. Restvedt asked you to leave his property and the time that you made contact with him? Do you recall how long that took?
I would say it was brief.
Brief, like a minute? Brief, like a second?
No more than 30 seconds.
No more than 30 seconds. So you had originally given Mr. Restvedt the opportunity to put out the fire, and he did so. So is it correct to say that the reason why you made physical contact with him is because he got mouthy with you?
Negative.
Is there another reason why?
Because he didn't disclose who he was.
Okay. And at which point did you ask for his identification?
After the second bucket of water was poured on the hip.
And can you tell us again how you made contact with Mr. Restvedt? It was the push-pull.
Yes, ma'am. Push, pull, enter.
Is that something that they teach you in academy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so what level of force would that fall under when you have that continuum?
the bottom of the continuum.
When you say bottom, what does that mean?
The lowest level of force.
Okay, so opposite of deadly force or
Yes,
lethal
yes,
force.
ma'am.
Okay. So you make contact, you attempt this maneuver, and then can you tell us again what happens?
Mr. Restvedt begins to back away, and he begins to use his hands to push my hands away.
Okay. Do you recall the damage to the shed?
I do.
Okay, can you explain that damage?
I was continuing to attempt to have.
Just the physical appearance of the damage. I believe there's a restitution issue involved, and you all filled out something in the report.
I'm going to object at this point. I think we're kind of far afield of the 3-6 issues.
I think I agree. I don't know what that has to do with the issue that I'm dealing with today.
So what the state has covered is the physical contact, and the shed goes to the physical contact. And I can get there really quick, if you allow me.
Well, just maybe tell me where it is we're going with this, because as I understand it, the issue has to do with, up to the contact when the hands were batted away, which is what the allegation is, that's what constitutes the assault.
Sure. And
So
there's
now, so we're talking about things that happened after that. What does that have to do with this? It may have something to do, the trial, but that's not what we're here
Sure.
for.
I think one of the issues that we're here for would be the general mismanagement of the state's case. And part of that goes to the inconsistency between reports. And I feel like it's the duty of the state to look into those inconsistencies as part of managing the case. And,
I'm not sure what that means.
well, mismanagement of the case, it goes to one of the issues that's in the motion that we're asking to dismiss because of mismanagement of the case, not just because of discovery issues.
But, again, let me get back to, since we're dealing with this, the 3-6 part of this, this has to do with whether the officers were properly where they could be when it happened, and then we have the batting of the hands. That's where the assault, if it occurred, happened then. So anything that happens after that really doesn't have much to do with the issue for the 3-6.
And I respect that, Your Honor.
Okay.
We'll move on.
All right.
And that's all, Your Honor. Any further questions?
Reader?
Yeah, so you arrive on scene, correct?
Yes, sir.
You get in your car, right?
Yes, sir.
What's the first thing you smell?
Fire smoke, sir.
Did you feel like you just walk away at that point?
Negative.
Why not?
Because of the burn ban and the possibility of a fire taking place, other than a small campfire.
The forest conditions we see here on Exhibit 1, was it dry out?
Yes, sir.
Were you concerned about a fire spreading to this foliage on Seminary Hill?
Yes, sir.
And when you arrived, in your head, was there knowledge that a fire had been reported by the Riverside Fire Authority?
Yes, sir.
Huerta, you mentioned that you had come in contact with Mr. Restvedt Fire.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you write a report for that incident?
I did.
Trace the report. Okay.
And this is Exhibit 4.
Identification form, all right?
Just in case I need to refresh. Officer Huerta, do you recall having physical contact with the woman that you were there responding to?
Yes,
So I'm gonna object. This other incident has nothing to do with this case.
How is this relevant to this?
Officer Huerta has brought up several times that because of his prior contact, he had reason to assume something about Mr. Restvedt's character. And in this incident, he also just admitted to having physical contact with someone, and the type of physical contact that he had, I think, goes to the type of physical contact that we have here. So I just want some clarification about that.
But again, I understand the intent, but isn't that more of a trial issue than what we're talking about here?
I think it also goes to his reasoning for entering onto the property. And I think he said in his testimony himself, that's the reason why he went to the property. That's why he went to this call. He assisted Officer Dorf is because of this incident.
I disagree. The testimony is he went to the incident because dispatch told there might be a fire there. And the fact that he had prior contact with the residents once before, that wasn't why he went there.
Yeah,
And it was his testimony that that's why he went.
well, again, that's a real collateral issue for what we have to deal with here today. So we're not going to retry another case here.
And Officer Huerta, do you remember the size of the fire pit?
Yes, ma'am.
And how would you describe that?
I would say it was a 3x3 pit, and the fire was made within that 3x3 pit, and most likely another 2x2 pit.
So you're saying it was the fire pit and then insulated around with something else?
Yeah, I couldn't tell you what it was.
Do you remember what the barrier was between the two different diameters?
Possibly stone blocks.
Okay, do you remember the inner part?
I can't recall what the initial pit was made of or what the second pit was made of.
Okay. If we show you a picture of the fire pit, do you think that that would refresh your recollection?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just going to use identification 2. So after looking at the photo, do you recall what the inner part of the fire pit was?
I can't tell if that's stone or metal.
Okay. That's fine. And that's all, Your Honor.
I have one more question.
All right, go ahead.
Officer, when you approached the fire pit, was there actually a fire going in it?
Yes, sir.
Was that in violation of the burn ban?
Yes, sir.
All right. In fact, it took not one, but 2 buckets of water to put it out, right?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have.
Recross after that?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, that's all, you can step down.
Stated move for admission of identification 2.
No objections.
All right, identification 2 is admitted as Exhibit 2.
All right.
So, and can we get the exhibits back up here?
Yeah.
So we've got 3, identification 3 on your desk. Ms. Martinez, we need that. And
Okay.
We need 3 that's on your desk still. That's been marked.
4.
Oh, was that 4?
Yes,
it's just
sure.
I'm sorry. That's right.
1, 2. Bring first. This goes first. All right. With Jeff or John? Call John Dorf. I'll go with you.
You swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes, I do.
See.
Good afternoon, officer. Would you please state your full name and spell your last name?
John Dorf, D-O-R-F-F,
And what do you do for a living?
police officer with the Central Police Department.
How long have you been a police officer?
I started in 1999. I started down in Las Vegas, so I've been here for about 3 years.
Give me a little bit about your training and your background.
Well, I went through basic academy back 19 years ago. Since then, I've become a field training officer. I'm on the Lewis County Regional SWAT team here, SWAT operator here.
You take ongoing continuing education as your role as a police officer?
Absolutely.
All right. And were you on duty on August 17th, 2018?
Yes, I was.
And in the evening, did you get dispatched to 500 East Plum Street in Centralia?
Yes, I did.
Were you wearing your uniform in a marked patrol car?
Yes, I was.
Why were you dispatched there?
We had a report of a illegal fire.
When you said we had a report, how did you get the report?
Dispatch notified us. They were notified by the fire department that had already been out of the house previously.
So what information was passed on to you by dispatch before you went out?
The fire department had been there previously for people that were burning during a burn ban. Asked them to extinguish the fire. It was reported that the subjects that were there were rude and not very responsive. And so the fire department didn't want to go out there again, so they asked us to respond.
Okay, so what did you do next?
I arrived on scene, and when I got there, I could smell smoke in the air. So Officer Huerta and I went around the side of the house. And
We stop you right there. So you get there, you smell smoke in the air. What did you think?
There's a fire burning.
At that point, could you just get in your car and leave if you wanted to?
No,
Why not?
because there's a burn ban in effect, and my job is to enforce the laws or educate people on the laws.
All right, and so what did you do next?
So we walked back and located a fire in the backyard.
Can you describe the fire?
It was in a fire pit. There was a tarp surrounding it. It was next to the Seminary Hill Nature Preserve. A lot of trees close by.
Stop you right there and show you exhibit number 2. What is that?
That is the fire pit.
Okay. Can I publish, Sean?
Yes.
So we got it up here on the screen. The officer in front of you there, little laser pointer. Okay. Would you take the pointer and describe to the court what you see here in this picture, exhibit number 2, which is now on the screen for us all to see?
Well, this is the fire pit that, where am I here? Right here. This is the fire pit where the fire was burning. When we arrived, there's a lot of like dry wood and debris over here. There was just off the picture where you can't see, there was a compost pile. It's full of a lot of dried leaves and what have you. And over to the left, just off the picture here is the Seminary Hill Nature Preserve.
So describe the Seminary Hill Nature Preserve for us.
Very thick forest, fir trees.
Okay. This is exhibit number 1. Does this exhibit number 1 depict those fir trees?
Yes, it does.
And were you concerned about the fir trees?
Absolutely.
Why were you concerned about the fir trees?
Because it was summer, it was extremely dry out, and those fir trees will burn as if they have gasoline on them.
So what happened next?
Well, we arrived. We said that there was a burn ban in effect.
How many individuals were there besides you and Officer Huerta and DPA Chandra?
There were 2. And they were sitting in chairs. I believe this gentleman here was sitting in one of the 2 chairs that were behind the fire pit there in the first picture.
And for the record, you were pointing to the defendant over here?
Yes.
Okay. What happened next?
He was asked to put out the fire.
Did he do it?
Reluctantly. There was quite a lot of banter back and forth before he put out the fire. He said he didn't need to. Was cussing at us, telling us we had no right to be on his property. Officer Huerta did tell him, say, hey, he claimed to be a red card firefighter and he knew what he was doing.
Who claimed to be it? Officer Huerta or this
No,
gentleman over here?
This gentleman over here.
Okay, the defendant.
The defendant, yes.
Okay, what happened next?
After a little bit of him telling us, get the fuck off my property, he did throw a bucket of water on the fire, which was still smoldering at the time. Officer Huerta asked him to please put more water on the fire, which he continued arguing, continued yelling at us with profanities. Then he threw another half a bucket of water on the fire.
Okay, then what happened?
Let's see. He continued to swear at us. We asked for his name.
Why is it important to get his name?
We have to document what we're going to do. And at that point, so after he threw the second bucket of water and he was still yelling at us, we made the determination that he was under arrest for the reckless burning. So
Violation of the burn ban?
Correct.
Okay. So what happened next?
And we asked for his name because in these situations you can issue a criminal citation and release somebody, but he wasn't willing to do that, so we didn't have a choice but to take him into custody. And as Officer Huerta went to take him into custody, he pulled away, and the other gentleman that was sitting in the camp chairs next to him jumped up and attempted to attack Officer Huerta from behind.
So what did you do?
I engaged that guy and basically got into a 3 to 5 minute fight with him.
What happened next?
While I was fighting with that gentleman, Officer Huerta was engaged in a fight with the defendant. I was able to, the gentleman I was fighting, I was able to get pinned to the ground. He wouldn't obey my commands and roll around his stomach so I could place handcuffs on him. But I was in a position of advantage, so I just maintained that. Officer Huerta continued trying to control the defendant and place him in custody. And eventually he used an LVNR and basically put him to sleep for a few seconds so he could get him into custody, and then he came and helped me get my subject in handcuffs.
Okay. So both suspects wound up in handcuffs, right?
Correct.
Lastly, when you first approached this this building, smelling smoke in the air, were you concerned about fire?
Yes.
Was that the primary reason you contacted these individuals back at their burning fire pit?
Yes.
Other questions?
Russ?
So when you arrived to the location, you tell us which way you headed from the gravel road to the house?
I was on the south side of the residence.
Okay. And so, did you observe smoke from the gravel road before entering onto the property?
I could smell it.
You could smell the smoke?
Right.
Okay. And at that point, did you believe that it was Mr. Restvedt's house?
I didn't know whose house it was. I'd never been there.
Did you believe it was the house in the photo? Did you believe the smoke was coming from the
Yes.
house in the photo?
Yes.
Okay. Did you attempt to knock on the door to make contact with anyone in that house?
Once I saw where the fire was coming from, I could hear there were people back there, so we went there to address those people.
Okay. And so did you go on the gravel road side where all the cars are parked? Or did you go on this side that's posted in the picture?
I went on the south side, which is where the gravel
Okay.
cars were parked.
Okay. So along your way, did you happen to see a no trespassing sign?
I didn't see one.
Okay. So you made it to the backyard, and did you see any fire from that southeast side as you're entering the backyard?
Yes, there was where the two tarps came together, there was a little gap in them, and I could see the fire between the
Through the tarps?
Right, there was a gap between the corners.
Okay. So then you went beyond that point, went closer to where you thought the fire would be. Did you have anything to put out the fire?
We have fire extinguishers in our cars.
So did you approach the house with fire extinguishers?
I did not.
Did you believe that there was an uncontrolled fire going on here?
I believe there was an illegal fire going on there.
And is that because of the information that you got from dispatch?
That's because there was a burn ban going on, and when I arrived, I could smell there was a fire burning.
Okay. So, did you ask for the fire department's assistance?
No, they asked for ours.
Okay. So when you arrived to the backyard, did you get permission from anyone to be back there?
You mean, did your client ask me to come back there?
Did anyone
No.
give you consent to be in the backyard?
I didn't need it.
Okay, was anyone asking for help?
Yes, the fire department was asking for help.
Nobody there on the scene?
Right.
Okay. When you said that you heard people talking, do you recall what the conversation was about?
No.
What was the volume of their voices? Was it like somebody having just a conversation like we're having, or was somebody yelling?
There was no yelling.
Okay, so just a typical conversation level?
Right.
And so what did you do next after seeing that there was in fact a fire going?
The subjects were advised that the burn ban was still in effect, that they admitted that the fire department had been out there earlier and told them about that. So So we asked them to put it out, and they didn't want to put it out.
But Mr. Restvedt did actually put out the fire?
After much resistance and hesitation, and
Did he use his own water to put out the fire?
yes,
So there's no fire extinguisher used?
right.
Okay. So do you remember where you were standing when you were having this conversation?
I was standing on the north side of the fire pit while they were on the south side of the fire pit.
Okay. And do you remember where Alicia Chandra was standing?
She was off in the distance a little bit further north.
Was she giving you directives on the process of arresting these individuals?
No. She was a civilian ride-along that was with me for the day.
Okay, did she have dialogue with anyone during the process?
I don't recall.
So you said that you had the authority to be in Mr. Restvedt's backyard.
Right.
Can you describe that authority?
I have the authority to enforce laws, and when there's a law getting broken, I go investigate it.
Okay, so
So
what
I have probable
happens?
cause to believe that they're in violation of the burn ban.
So what happens when you believe that someone's committing a crime, but it's on somebody's private property versus being out in public?
Well, I object. I mean, that's a point of legal argument.
Sustained.
Do you recall the area around the fire pit?
Can you be more specific?
Do you
What-
recall the scene of the fire pit?
Yes.
Do you recall there being construction material and tools and equipment?
I just remember seeing that picture up there refreshed my memory. The only thing that wasn't in that picture that I remember seeing was a compost pile.
Okay. All right. And do you recall where Officer Huerta was standing within that scene?
He was standing in front of me.
In front of you? So that would be between the fire pit and you? And
Correct.
Okay. And about how far away were you from Mr. Restvedt?
I would probably say if you were on the other side of the table, probably about that distance.
And about how far away was Officer Huerta from Mr. Restvedt?
He was a little bit, Officer Huerta was probably 4 or 5 feet in front of me.
Okay. So before there was any physical altercation, did you feel like you had the situation under control?
Not necessarily, because he wasn't very receptive. So there were a lot of indicators there that he wasn't our typical person we deal with that is cooperative. So yeah, he was verbally assaultive and just didn't like us being there. So no, I didn't feel like we had it under control.
And did you know that Mr. Restvedt was not wanting you in his backyard?
I think he made it clear when he said, "Get the fuck off my property."
So do you think perhaps that had anything to do with his attitude?
That we were on his property? Well, I don't,
Do
I'm
you
not
think
understanding your question.
Having police officers confront you in your private backyard, do you think that's different than being confronted by officers out on the street?
I don't know his train of thought on police officers. So I
Okay,
can't
what is
really-
your experience in that? Do you know?
My experience is that he would respond the same way no matter where we are.
Okay. All right. Do you think that there would have been a better outcome had you contacted somebody at the front door?
Well, I'm going to object. That calls for speculation.
Sustained.
No further questions, Your Honor.
No other questions?
Thank you, that's all. You can step down.
Solemnly state.
Sorry, Martinez?
I'd like to call
Yes, we got a second.
Jessica Sterling.
She's
Actually, before I call her out, there's a video that I wanted to play. Will we be able to use this?
That's prosecuted, I don't know how it's hooked up or,
That's ours.
Can I just hook it up using this?
Well,
I've got a Mac.
why don't you give us 5 minutes and we'll look up the machine.
Okay.
all right.
Is this something you've shown us before?
It's the video, yeah, the video that I sent.
What's that have to do with the time between they arrived and they made contact? Because everything I see is contact and afterwards.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it does go,
Well, you can put it on, we'll object. There you go.
okay.
There's that. And let's see, you have a what kind of machine that I'm saying. Yeah, all right. Should play. Give this to the clerk. When you're ready. So, right here. This is really nice because it turns it on. And this is close, it turns it off. So it's kind of here. So right now it's off, but turn it on. ready to go?
In a couple of minutes.
Okay, I gotta run downstairs real quick.
The attorney? Yeah. I forgot.
Bradley Meeker.
Meeker. Just now it's on still. When you said
So you have like a CD mark or something like that?
really nice.
Yes, it's
It's almost almost like
Yeah, Jesus, you was about.
It's really good.
review it and sign
It's one
it.
picture.
Okay.
Verify that's the one.
It's really good. It's nice.
Did you know that there was they were supposed to be paid last year, but I was over. So that was for this year.
Well, of course it isn't. You look at, all right, it doesn't matter. Because
I never heard of that. Their name's the Fruity Rebels.
And they are.
All right, we're back after the recess. Ms. Martinez.
Your Honor, I called Jessica Sterling.
You raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
Yes.
Have a seat.
Jessica, please state your name and spell your last name for the board.
Jessica Sterling, spelled Stirling.
Jessica, where do you reside?
I live at 505 East Plum Street in Centralia.
And who do you reside with?
I reside with Troy Restvedt, and we also occasionally have roommates that we offer housing to for work trade, so we temporarily have someone else living with us right now as well.
Okay, and when you say work trade, what type of work?
Our house is under construction right now, and so we've been getting help for different things like the roof and the siding and things like that.
Okay, and what is your relation to Troy Restvedt?
He's my life partner.
Okay. And do you recall an incident that occurred on August 17, 2018 at your residence?
Yes.
Can you tell us what you were doing prior to that incident occurring?
I was inside the house watching TV.
Can you tell us what part of the house that you were in?
I was in my bedroom.
And where is your bedroom located?
Well, what I consider the back side of the house. So the bedroom window overlooks the back carport area, which also has a shed, and you can see up into the neighboring wooded hillside.
Okay. Did you have view of where Mr. Restvedt was at that time?
I could see both Troy and Simon from where I was at.
Okay. So can you explain when you first realized that there was officers and an unknown person on your
Sure.
residence?
I was alerted by our dog barking, sort of a little bit more distressed than any normally would bark, and so I was concerned, and I got up from where I was sitting in my room watching TV and went over to one of the other bedrooms and looked out the window and noticed a person standing, a woman standing on my property who I'd never seen before, and that was strange, so I decided to go outside and see what was going on.
Can you describe what that woman looked like?
She had her hair pulled back, she had a bright yellow, kind of mustard yellow shirt, and I believe black pants. Never seen her before.
Okay. Go ahead and continue.
And so when I noticed that she was in the backyard, I left the other bedroom and walked through the house, and as I walked through the house, I was able to look through my bedroom as I walked past it and out the window and saw Troy standing and talking to someone, and so I assumed that he was talking to the first person that I saw. And when I went out the back door, I noticed there were officers standing around the area where Troy was at. And when I walked outside, I stepped down into the carport area where there's a lot of materials for our project, and I stood on the other side of the materials and started kind of observing to see what was happening.
Okay. Did you have any verbal words with anyone at that time?
Well, I was confused why they were there, so I said, "Officer, what's going on? And I didn't get any response, and I said, well, what are you doing here? And still no response. And so for a third time, I just said, what's going on? Why is this happening? And I didn't get any response.
Okay, and then what did you observe?
It seemed like a very heightened physical situation, and so I thought, this is strange, and I need to record this. So I ran into the house and found my phone and ran back outside and started recording.
Where was your phone inside the home?
In the bedroom next to the bed.
About how long do you think it took you to retrieve your phone?
Maybe 15 seconds.
Okay. So then you came back out.
And I came back out and I started recording, and noticed that it was getting violent, so I just tried to stay calm and not get involved.
When you said that you noticed that it's getting violent, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, at that point, once I started recording, was when the officer was getting physical with Troy as far as however it was, he was putting his hands on him and taking him down to the ground.
Okay. And where were they when the officer was taking Troy down to the ground?
Just on the end of the carport where there's gravel and wood piles and a shed really close to the carport area. So it was in the backyard behind the house.
Okay. And why did you just record and not intervene?
Well, state's going to object at this point. The issue before the court is a 3-6 hearing, entry onto private property. That's all we're doing here today. And it sounds like this witness picked up after they're already there and already had discussions with the defendant. I don't see that she has anything germane to the issue before the court this afternoon.
I'll move on to something else. So you tried to ascertain why the individuals were on your property and you got no response?
Correct.
Were there no trespassing signs on your property?
Yes.
What other measures do you take to ensure the privacy at your home?
Keeping my doors locked, having window coverings. We also have a security camera system.
Okay. You said you own a dog?
Yes.
That's probably a pretty good service to you. And can you describe the layout of your backyard?
So what I consider the backyard is everything on the side of the house that would be towards the east. There's a carport that covers, at the time, covered most of the back portion of the length of the house. And then beyond that, there's gravel all over the ground, as well as a shed. And then behind the shed, out of all kinds of view from any other direction would be where we have a gravel area, and then there's a 2-ring fire pit.
Okay. Did you have tarps up around your house?
Yes, in the backyard we had put up tarps for privacy at that time.
And you said you're remodeling the home?
Yes.
So at that point, on the day of this incident, your home wasn't complete?
No.
Did you have a fence around your home?
There's no fence.
And so you said that you supplement this with tarps?
At that time, yes.
When you are approaching your house, can you see your backyard from the front?
No, not when you're approaching, but when you go down the gravel drive in front of the house, it's parallel to the way the house sits on the property. If you get just past our property and approaching a shed or a carport type of thing on someone else's property, if you look, you can see very tiny portions of our backyard. Mostly where the shed sits, you can see the shed that's in the backyard.
Okay. Did anyone try to make contact with you in the house before entering your backyard?
No.
You said when you exited your house, you were exiting through the back door?
Correct.
That leads you directly into the backyard?
Into the carport area that is in the backyard, yes.
Your Honor, I have a video. While it does capture physical altercation, it also has Alicia Chandra in it, which goes to some of the arguments that I'm making in the 3.6 about her acting as both witness and advocate.
Well, just assume for the sake of argument that she was there, and assume for the sake of the argument that she's going to be a witness. And I don't know that we need other, we already have testimony that she was there.
Not just to the fact that she was there, but her acting as a witness and an advocate.
I understand that, but I don't need to see a video
Okay.
to address that issue. I don't
That's
think.
understood, sir. So did you know who, you know now it's Alicia Chandra, did you know then who Alicia Chandra was?
No.
Who did you believe her to be?
A neighbor?
Okay. No further questions from?
No questions.
All right, thank you. That's all. You can step down.
May she remain in the courtroom, young?
If you don't intend to call her for anything else. Any other witnesses?
Simon Benz, and I will go retrieve them.
Okay. Have you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth? Okay, have a seat.
Good afternoon. Can you introduce yourself to the court?
My name's Simon Wilson Benz,
Can you spell your last name, sir?
B-E-N-Z.
Okay. And can you tell us how you are related to Mr. Troy Restvedt?
I'm a friend.
Okay. And were you with Troy Restvedt on August 17th, 2018?
I was.
And can you tell the court about that incident a little bit?
So I object.
Can you start us off by when you first saw officers and the unknown person on Troy's property?
Yes, I noticed we had just finished working and we're sitting around, and I noticed a woman come behind the house and two police officers.
And when you say that you were working, what is it that you were doing?
I was tearing off their roof. I started out working for them and then we became friends. Tearing off their roof, cleaning up the debris from such, and putting a new roof on their house.
Okay, so that day you all were working on the roof?
Yes, all day.
Okay, so you ended and now you're sitting in the backyard with Troy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. When you say that you saw them enter in to the backyard, which side did the officers and the unknown person enter onto?
It'd be from the south going north, or the left side if you're in the backyard facing now.
Okay,
Left.
all right. And so what happened after they entered onto the property?
They walked around the shed. There was a shed in the way behind the house, and asked if we were having a fire.
Okay. And did they walk around to the other side? Was it to be able to access you all?
Objection, that's speculation.
Could they not access you from the side that they had walked in on?
No, there's a carport and quite a bit of lumber and a shed in the way. You'd have to crawl over piles of lumber with nails sticking out of it to get to us, or walk around the shed.
Okay, so they walked around to the other side on the other side of the shed.
Yes.
And then what happened?
The first officer, I don't know his name, said, "You guys are still burning," and Troy said yes, and they said, "You've been told to put that out." So Troy had a 5-gallon bucket of water there and drowned the fire. It was a hat-sized fire. Drowned the fire, and
And what did he do that with?
a 5-gallon bucket of water
That was
already sitting there.
already filled?
No, he went and filled it up beforehand.
Okay. And then what?
The officers didn't like that. They said that he needed to get another 5 gallons of water. So he complied and went and got the other 5 gallons of water and dumped that on the fire as well.
Okay. So at that time, do you recall where the officers were standing?
The first gentleman was pretty much level with the fire, I would say. The second officer was a few steps behind him at the corner of the shed.
Okay. Did the officers announce their presence before coming back to the
No.
backyard?
No,
Were you shocked by the officers' presence?
yes.
And you said you didn't know the officers'
On objection to her
names.
repeating the testimony.
It'll go faster if you don't do that.
Okay.
It's not a big deal.
The officer to my left is Officer Huerta.
Okay.
Can you tell me what Officer Huerta's role
He's the
was?
first officer around the shed. The lady that is here was the first person there, but she didn't come around the shed. He was the first officer around the shed that was talking with Troy.
Okay, the lady that you're referring to, are you talking about the lady that's in the hallway
Yes.
right now? You can see her? Okay, that's Alicia Chandra.
Okay.
Okay. So Alicia Chandra came to the backyard first.
She was the first person that crossed the back of the house. She did not come around the shed. She was standing out in the yard somewhere that I couldn't see her.
Okay, were you aware of who she was?
No.
Okay. Did she have any contact with you or Mr. Restvedt?
No.
Just the officers?
Yep.
No further questions, Your Honor.
No other questions?
All right, thank you. You can step down.
Your Honor, that's all for the defense.
All right. Any rebuttal?
No.
All right.
So on this issue, Your Honor, question that becomes whether the officers can legitimately go into private property in this particular case. The officers had information before they even got there that the Riverside Fire Authority had been out there, that the defendant and his buddy had been burning, and the fire authority had gotten some feedback, I guess for lack of a better term, from the defendant to the point where the fire authority thought that there might still be a fire burning, and that the fire authority folks didn't feel it safe for the fire department to go out there. They wanted the police to go out and ensure that indeed Mr. Restvedt had put out his fire. So the police roll up on scene. They don't go through any private parts of the residence, in the house at all. But they get out of their cars, and what do they smell? Smoke. Well, if there's smoke, there's fire. So the officers at that point determined that there's probably still a fire burning as reported by the Riverside Fire Authority. So they went back to where they saw the fire, and Officer Dorf's testimony is actually kind of interesting because he says they came around to where the driveway was. He saw through a crack in between the tarps that have been hanging there. They could see the fire burning. You know, and if you've ever seen a fire twinkle through an opening, you know exactly what he's talking about. So they walked back. They're polite with the defendant and his friend. Guys, you can't have a fire here. Put the fire out. And what do they get? Mr. Restvedt decides he's going to argue with them, says he's some kind of firefighter himself, and because of that he can, I guess, not obey the Riverside Fire Authority or not obey the county-wide total burn ban. There is a burn ban in effect. Both officers testified to that. The state supplied with its brief a copy of the notice of that particular effect, or the notice of that particular burn ban. So there the officers are there. Mr. Restvedt doesn't want to put this fire out. Finally, the officers convince him, you've got to put the fire out, so he throws some water on it. It's still smoldering. Anybody that's seen Smokey the Bear on TV knows you put water, you stir, put water again. Let's say you put a fire out. That's just my anecdotal. I don't have any testimony to that, but it seems reasonable given the officers' actions at that point, because they then tell Mr. Restvedt, you need a second bucket of water on the fire. There's some pushback on that too, but he eventually does it. At that point, the officer said, okay, I got to write a report on this. And so he's thinking to himself, and he needs Mr. Restvedt's name. Okay, what's your name? And we get the profanity, and no, I'm not going to tell you my name, and get off my property, along with the expletives. So the officer is well within his right there. He's got essentially two crimes being committed. One, the fire in violation of the bird ban. The state supplied that legal authority with its brief. Second crime is all of a sudden now this Mr. Restvedt is obstructing the officer because he's hindering the officer in completing his investigation. That's actually obstructing. So the officer's going to place him under arrest for that. And what's Mr. Restvedt's response to that? Well, it backs up. He won't the officer put him in handcuffs. He swats the officer's hands away. Eventually he falls over and the officer gets on top of him and they gain control of this guy. So that's the whole thing. The question here is, did the officers have a legitimate concern that would come under the community caretaking function that they have to ensure that, one, a fire is put out. Why is that important for the community? Well, we don't want Seminary Hill burning down. And you heard the officers testify that the fire was within 10 to 20 feet. You saw the picture, exhibit number 1, which shows the overhanging branches. There's a burn ban in effect. The stuff is tinder dry. Officer Dorf testified that there was even a small, very dry compost pile next to this fire. And so we want to make sure that doesn't catch on fire. You saw the pictures in exhibit number 2, which show actually building materials in close proximity to the fire. We don't want that catching on fire either. So there's a legitimate concern for the officers, given the burn ban, that this fire could put the community, specifically the forest next door to the defendants, in jeopardy, and that's their community caretaking role. We're not saying that this is a situation where, what's interesting is that the Officer Dorf's comment when he asked, gee, could the fire department assist you? He goes, no, they called us to assist them. The fire department had already been out there. So in terms of the level of, I guess, hostility, in this case, it started out slow with the fire department, and every time it got ratcheted up, it was that gentleman's fault.
But notwithstanding that, the officers have this information, they smell the smoke, they go back to check the fire out. That's legitimate community caretaking reason for them to be on the property in the vicinity of the fire pit, which was in the vicinity of the forest. So there should be no basis to suppress any evidence gained from those observations, from that entry into their private backyard. I guess that's point number one. I'll stop there. We'll go from point to point.
All right, Mr. Martinez?
Your Honor, our argument is that there's no sense of exigency here on this call. There's no emergency. There's no community caretaking function that fits within Washington's case law definitions. This was a call that the officers took because the fire department had earlier, approximately an hour or two earlier, had come out, asked Mr. Restvedt to put out the fire. Mr. Restvedt put out the fire then and there. The fire department then called dispatch sometime later, and giving dispatch information, something got misconstrued about aggressive nature. I mean, there's audio of it, and there's nothing, the guy who's calling does not say anything about aggressive nature. He says, in fact, he says, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the house is suspicious because windows are blacked out, everything looks suspicious. Well, yeah, it was under construction, it was being remodeled, so maybe it did appear suspicious to the person just driving by. But those were the words of the person who called dispatch. There wasn't anything saying that he was aggressive in nature or uncooperative. And in fact, when fire went out, they didn't even go to the backyard. They contacted Mr. Restvedt in the front. Mr. Restvedt came to the front, they had a conversation. Mr. Restvedt went back and
Let me
got the
stop
fire.
here. You're throwing in all kinds of facts that I didn't know.
Okay.
You're throwing in lots of facts that I don't know anything about, so let's keep it focused on the testimony that we heard here.
So given the information that the officers had, given the testimony that the officers gave, there was no reason for the officers to believe that they were providing any community caretaking to anyone, that anything was out of control, or that anyone was in need of assistance. They simply could have knocked on the front door, made contact with Mr. Restvedt there, or Ms. Sterling, asked to put out the fire. If they didn't put out the fire, then hand a citation. If that didn't go the way they wanted, then make the arrest. But the fact is the officers bypassed several layers of privacy that Mr. Restvedt and Ms. Sterling have put into their home and showed up in their backyard unannounced. And that was shocking, that was startling, and Mr. Restvedt did ask them to leave. He didn't think that it was appropriate for officers to be in his backyard, and if anybody would make police contact, they could make it in a lawful manner. And so there's just nothing here that fits the bill for officers and a prosecutor to come barreling into somebody's private property. You heard both officers give testimony that the fire could not be seen from the front. One officer says they didn't smell or see fire first, but then they heard from the other officer and then they noticed it. Then you have Officer Dorf saying he didn't see fire, he only smelled fire. Well, the appropriate response is to, if you think that that fire's coming from that home, then try to make contact with the person in that home and deal with it. And they already had the previous information coming in that it was in fact that home. So I wish that we could entertain that, because I think a lot of this would be avoided, but this is one issue that Mr. Restvedt feels very strongly about, and I'm here to advocate on his behalf for this.
All right.
The only thing I would add is that if you look at the standard in State versus Johnson, which we cite, State versus Johnson, it's a subjective standard for the officer. So what was he thinking? And that's why we went into that. So when he gets out based on information, and that's why the information he received from dispatch is important, because he's decided, all right, here's what I received from dispatch. There was a fire earlier. They think it's relit. They get out of their car and they smell smoke. what is the logical inference from all of that subjectively in his head that then justifies his entry into the private area so he could verify whether or not there was criminal activity going on. When I say criminal activity, I mean the fire, which is a violation of the burn ban, is a crime.
I deny the motion to suppress. I agree with Mr. Meager on this one. The emergency exception for the warrant requirement does apply here because of the community caretaking function that the officers have. And when they got out, knowing that there was a burn ban, knowing that there had been a fire earlier, knowing that they'd been called by the fire department, and then when they get out, smelling the smoke, that's enough. That's enough for the officers. Just because we can now, in calm reflection, propose some other possible routes that the officers could have taken, that doesn't mean that what they did is negated. So there was, just based on that, in and of itself, there was enough for the officers to go around the house. Then Officer Dorf saw the fire through the crack in the tarp. They had probable cause to believe that there was something going on when they smelled the smoke, and they certainly when they saw it before they went back into the very backyard part. So for those reasons, the officers were justified in their entry, and the motion to suppress is denied. All right, Mr. Martinez, your next issue then.
The next issue is revolving around discovery. There have been several issues with that. The state has still not given me discovery on the original origin of the complaint, which I asked for. All I've been given is that is the fire department's call to dispatch, but I haven't been able to find where the original complaint is from, and so I've asked.
As to who called the fire department?
Right, to find out the origin of this call. So that's what I've asked for, and so I haven't received that yet. And then in addition, I only have 3 officer reports that there are at least 10 officers in that video, several of which did go hands-on or make physical contact with Mr. Restvedt. And we don't have reports from those officers. We don't have a report from the officer who transported Mr. Restvedt. So I'm just feeling like maybe there's some additional reports out there that haven't been transferred over.
Well, let's ask the question. Are there any other reports?
Not that I know of, Your Honor. No, this is a case where you heard the officers. This thing was kind of all well in hand and under control before everybody else showed up. I can put on additional testimony for a few questions just to give the court the lay of what happened after the defendant was placed under arrest. But what had happened, because 2 officers were, this is my offer of proof, the 2 officers were hands-on with 2 suspects. They called an emergency, and a lot of other officers showed up. They didn't get there until after all this ended. So what happened after these 2 were placed in custody has no bearing at all on the arrest or the resisting arrest or the assault that the defendant is alleged to have occurred perpetrated on the officer. So we gave him what we have. When she asked me for some more information from Riverside Fire Authority, I sent a subpoena to the chief out there and called him on the phone. He emailed me back what they had. We've got everything we have on this particular case we've given to the defense. A lot of times other officers show up, they won't write a report if they show up and there's really nothing to do, and then they take off again. So yeah, there were other officers that were there. I think another officer actually transported the defendant once the whole thing had calmed down, but I don't have a report from any of those guys.
You don't have one, or you've checked and none were prepared?
We have, well, I don't have it. They, as the court knows, they are linked by incident number, and the officers are trained to link their supplemental reports to our incident number. We do a Spillman check on all of these things as part of our office protocol, and there were no other supplementals.
All right.
And Your Honor, I also submitted a substitution of counsel to the state, and I also copied the court staff on that. And that was done on September 24th. Even prior to that, I had handed the state my business card with my phone number and my contact information. And yet, you know, beyond that time, discovery was still going to another law firm and not to the information that I had supplied to the clerks and Mr. Meager.
Right, is there anything that you have not received now at this point?
I wouldn't know, Your Honor. I don't have any way of verifying that. I know that I've received additional information from Mr. Meager, and it's kind of come in waves, and so I don't really have a way of tracking to see if there's anything else, since there are so many missing reports. And I understand what he's saying when a multitude of officers show up somewhere, but when you have officers that are placing a hog tie restraint on someone, officers that are carrying somebody away who's supposedly combative, I mean, those are instances where you write reports. I mean, that's policy and procedure. And so, you know, we're still missing that stuff. So it would lead me to believe that there's more discovery that should be coming to me. And even up till, I think 2 days ago, I received an email from my firm saying that Mr. Meager was still calling them, trying to get a hold of me. And I have the email where it shows the phone call, because all the phone calls come in and they're logged through a Ruby mail system that, you know, documents all the callers that have called the firm and what their message is.
Well, that's part of the problem here is, you know, there may be other incidents, there may be some other things that happen after the alleged assault here, which I think is the argument. But the reports from the officers, the 3 reports, those have all been provided. Everything that was provided to Mr. McGee earlier has been provided to Ms. Martinez.
So,
and have you got your file straightened out, so any contact goes to Ms. Martinez at her current number?
right, I haven't made any phone calls to her in the last day or so. I don't know what she's talking about. But I do know that, so we keep in our file, there's this orange sheet here where our paralegals put down their actions, and we see the first discovery package, which was basically reports in Exhibit 3 here. On 8/24, it went to Mr. McGee, then we mailed it again on 8/30 to Ms. Martinez at the address she provided. And then we had 2 other supplemental discovery packages. One was mailed on October 1 and one was on October 17. I think that last one was the information we got back from the Riverside Fire Authority after I subpoenaed them to get that information. So, you know, and the court's essentially heard our entire case today. That's it. Counsel's had an opportunity to talk to these officers and meet whatever defense she has, she can mount against the actions that have been testified here today.
All right, Martinez, anything else?
Yes, Your Honor, I would argue the fact that we've had ample time to do what we need to do to conduct an appropriate investigation and contact all the witnesses. I mean, I just recently got the full witness list, which was approximately 10 people, and then now the most recent witness list has changed to just both officers and not even Alicia Chandra. So I don't know, you know, in what world Mr. Meager lives in where, you know, just a week and a half is ample time to conduct an investigation where at least 10 officers showed up. There's the prosecutor and then the fire department, EMS. I mean, they're alleging that my client was combative through this whole process when we obviously know otherwise, but we need time to be able to conduct interviews with all those officers.
Well, so we have the discovery cutoff, 10 days before trial, and trial is set for next week, the 5th. I would note that the last discovery, which which include Riverside Fire Authority stuff, was sent to council on 10/17. So we're more than 10 days. It was sent to her more than 10 days before the end of the trial.
All right, and the state at this point for trial is intending on calling only those two witnesses?
Well, I may have Alicia Chandra as well, but her statement is included in the discovery.
All right.
But yeah, these two officers, and that's it.
All right. Okay.
Well, I mean, that's 12 business days from trial that I received the witness list. That's when I had been asking for information repeated times, both in person, coming to hearings, as well as through email, even sending Mr. Meager an email that specifically says, hey, I think that there's some sort of discrepancy. I tried to hand you my NOA and my substitution of counsel.
Well, okay, I understand that, but if we're talking about the state's calling 3 witnesses, and you had that information, right?
But that's
You've had
what
those
the
3.
state-
You've had those 3, right?
Correct.
Okay, and the other witnesses that were officers who arrived later, right? And if the state is not intending to use any, there's no statements from the defendant, correct?
Correct.
All right, so none of those officers, that's the only reason anything later, happening later, would be relevant. How did any of those witnesses have anything to do with this case that would be relevant or admissible?
Because there are Officer Dorf and Officer Huerta are saying that my client was combative and aggressive in nature throughout the whole entire process. We have other officers there that say otherwise. If there's a discrepancy there.
Well, the whole process ends when they get the cuffs on.
Well, that's not the statements that they have. That's not the report that they have.
I understand there may be more that happens later that gets included in police reports, but as far as what's relevant for a trial, I don't see where any of that stuff becomes relevant. Because the case is over when we get to the part where there's the confrontation and getting him in cuffs, and once he's under control, anything that happens after that, for either side, I don't see how that comes in.
I think that inconsistencies are relevant and would suggest that there's possibly inconsistencies that occurred prior.
Well, okay, there's the information that's been provided, and especially as this case has been now narrowed down, and since the information was provided timely with regard to the discovery cutoff, I'm not going to find that there's any harm here. There is still time. You can still contact the other officers should you choose to do so. Okay, other issues?
The other issue was requesting disqualification of Ms. Chandra. And that was pursuant to 3.7. Ms. Chandra was on the scene, giving directives, very much involved, participating, in what was going on, calling out what crimes she believed were occurring in front of her eyes, and she was definitely a very passionate witness on scene. And then subsequent to that, also was at Troy's first appearance, his second hearing, and then as well as the hearing that I was at. She was also with Mr. Meager for that. So she's playing both sides of the coin here and wasn't ever adequately screened out from the process, which we believe she should have been, since she was a witness to what occurred.
I'd be curious as to which RPC 3.7 council is looking at, because the one that Washington State has adopted since 2007 expressly allowed situation where one person, one attorney in a law firm is a trial advocate and allows another attorney in the firm to be a witness, so long as that witness doesn't have any other problems with the RPCs, like former clients and things like that, or conflicts with the current client. In our case, our client's the state of Washington. There's no real conflict there. So, in fact, there's Part B of that rule expressly allows that. So I appreciate where counsel's coming from, and perhaps if this case had been tried back in 2006, you might have a legitimate beef. But as the rule stands now, we're well within our ethical obligations. Ms. Shawn will not be a trial counsel at this particular. She's simply a fact witness telling the court what she observed when she was doing a ride-along with the officers. So I think we're within, well, I mean, respectfully, I think we're well within the RTCs on this.
All right. Ms. Martinez, the 3.7B does appear to allow this circumstance.
It basically appears to conflict with 3.7A. And I think that that's because there's a difference when someone's a prosecutor in a public office type organization versus just a regular private firm. And so I think that that's why there is a difference here.
Well, it doesn't exclude, I mean, if that were the case, the rule would exclude prosecutors from this rule, and it does not. So the motion to disqualify the prosecutor's office is denied. All right, anything else?
No, Your Honor, that was the last of the arguments.
Okay, so we have confirmation is on next, or is on this Thursday.
Tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow. So we need to get the findings for this.
Yeah.
And
Do you have the docket, Your Honor? Somebody else have it?
that's in Department 1, but I will be available all afternoon. So the confirmation's at 3.
Correct.
Okay, so we can do it before or after that, whatever works for council. So if you want to do it at 3:30 or 4:30,
Sure.
So you don't need to make a separate trip.
All right, I'll get busy.
All right. Let's just put it on for 3:30 right now.
Okay.
For tomorrow for that. And actually, what we'll end up. Let's just do this. Let's just leave it at 4. Do you have anything at 4?
Today or tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Yep.
Let's just do it at 4 o'clock when it's set. We'll just do confirmation. I'll take care of the confirmation and we'll do the presentation of those files.
Okay.
We'll just do it all in here so you don't have to be bouncing
So
around.
all at 4 o'clock, do not come at 3?
Correct. We'll just do it at 4 here so you don't need to bounce into 2 different courtrooms.
Right.
And we'll just take care of the
I
confirmation.
encourage council maybe get here a little early. If there's any discrepancy on the findings, we can work those out. So,
Do you have a 1 o'clock? I'm going to get here as soon as I can.
Okay. All right. That's all.
His office is the attorney for this gentleman here, this judge. And actually, I've got many instances where they actually have admitted to this again and again, where they admit that they are the prosecuting attorney's office is the attorney for this court and for this judge in the case of and this was actually sent last year to the prosecutor and to the board of commissioners and to ATG deputies. Well, he is actually acting as we got 3.1 with a friend of mine has this guy right here has a 3.1 case going against them. Actually, they just settled on it. And in all of that, they sign off, the prosecutor's office signs off again and again, how they are the attorney for the Superior Court. And actually, there's a statement from Judge Lawler himself. I believe it was at the beginning of this year, where he writes in there himself a statement about this whole thing. So I think it's undisputed. There's over a dozen instances, and I can give you The documentation,
Yeah.
I asked them if they gave you any kind of notice, because I guess, but due to the rules of that, they're supposed to give you notice, but they never did. And then he said they never have, and their offices never give anyone notice. So,
Yeah, you want to
anyway.
pass on any
Oh, by the way,
information?
I'm wondering too, I don't know, maybe I should ask the prosecutor. Are those pellet stoves, like the ones that you use for smoking, are those included in a burn ban? They do smoke, don't they?
Yeah.
Huh, I was just curious. Just an idea, just a thought. When they're over there talking, I was like, oh, is that the only thing that makes smoke? Not today, that I know of.
No.
So I don't, I was just a question. Anyway, so obviously they haven't disclosed.